Chapter 331 How to Find the by Hydesgrain. 3 days later, it was Monday morning and a new week started as Jason completed his practice with the Netherworld's Fort body refining technique. Getting out of the basin, he dried his toned body before he entered his soul world to take a look at what the Black Origin Flame was currently doing. However, there was nothing special that changed over the last few days. The Black Origin Flame was currently working hard to construct its mana core as it did for the past days too. After his soul bonds reached the peak of the unblemished rank, which caused the demand for soul energy to increase to 2,000 units, Jason could easily strengthen his vessel by absorbing mana and refining his body. Artemis and Scorpio won't be able to become stronger without liquefying their mana anymore, which was exactly what Jason wanted. This allowed the faint pain within him to disappear, which was liberating. Unfortunately, this didn't solve the issues Jason had with the high amplification which he received from all his soul bonds thanks to his superior soul world. Once the Black Origin Flame evolved into a Tier 1 Origin Flame, the baptism Jason would receive could postpone his issue a little bit. It might as well be enough to allow both Artemis and Scorpio to enter the magical rank without issue. But this would only be the beginning. If his vessel's pace in enlarging and being strengthened was slower than his soul bond's increase in strength, everything would be for naught. As such, Jason became interested in the mythic garden Dahlia was talking about. Furthermore, after he and Dahlia told Shane everything they figured out about the mythic garden, with it possibly being a rift that might be cursed to blur everyone's memories about what happened inside the rift and where exactly it was situated, Shane couldn't keep down his excitement anymore. Over the last few weeks, he was becoming restless and frustrated because he was unable to find clues about suitable cursed beasts for Jason's or the whereabouts of the mythic garden that might solve all their issues at once. Now that he knew that it was most likely a hidden rift governed by the Jewel clan, Shane could start searching in a specific field. They had to find out where the rift was, enter it if possible, and search for a suitable cursed beast that Jason could bind without creating more or even bigger problems. With that in mind, Shane was overjoyed and immediately started to write down everything to not forget it before he began with his research. As it was Monday, Jason decided to look at how the Golden Soul shop was doing. After he limited the number of goods for everyone, his sales neither decreased nor went up. The merchants who initially wanted to purchase everything inside his shop were enraged and abandoned him, while the hunters and blacksmiths inside the B-grade cities purchased everything normally. Jason was also trying his best to figure out how to find the mythic garden. Thus, he decided that his shop was the best way to do so. With a little bit of scheming, he was confident in getting to know more about it. Inside the shop, Jason waited for slave merchants, youths from influential families, or other higher authorities that might know more. However, even after waiting for the whole day, nobody at this league seemed to enter his shop and only a few blacksmiths and hunters purchased goods. He didn't want to waste any precious time and decided to practice the Heaven's Hell technique and absorbed mana in the meantime. It was only shortly before the Golden Soul shop would close for the day when he noticed two young blacksmith apprentices entering his shop while releasing particular confidence Jason was already familiar with. Seeing this, he couldn't suppress a smile that was covered by the mask he always wore inside the shop. Finally, listening carefully to their words, while patiently waiting behind the counter, Jason heard that they seemed to be top students from one of the best schools on Terebrine. They were in their third year, and after trying to remember where their school was, Jason figured out that it was one of the schools in the A-grade city that was nearby. Are these two students here for a short visit, or do they have a task? He asked himself, but after thinking about it for a moment, he decided that it was not important for him. Instead, he could finally start with the simple plan he thought of before. Disappearing behind shelves, he took off his mask before he opened his shop's door, acting as if he entered it just now. Taking a look around as if he was searching for something, Jason found the two youths who looked at him weirdly because they couldn't sense any mana fluctuations from him. Normally, They wouldn't bother about someone like Jason, without any mana fluctuation, but he was a youth, just like them, probably even younger. Yet, his confidence and the aura enveloping him were on a completely different league. They were almost 17 years old and at the 4th master rank, but they felt intimidated by Jason, who looked at them for a moment before he approached them. His golden eyes sized up the two youths, who felt like he was going to devour them with his glance alone before Jason said nonchalantly, "Hello, sorry to bother the two of you, but I saw that you two wear the Heir de Skull's emblem. My name is Jason and I was invited to Terebrine because of the Mythic Garden. Unfortunately, I can't seem to remember more about it and everything is blurry. I only remember that it was a rift or something like that and that it's extremely important. The person who invited me told me to either ask top students or teachers from A-grade schools or the government if my memories about it were blurred, but I've lost my way. If it's not too much of a hassle, can you two help me out?" By handing out a few pieces of information that could prove his knowledge about the Mythic Garden. At the same time indirectly saying that the two youths in front of him looked like they were top students of the Heir de Skull, to give them the feeling that they were superior to they were. This was a small trick which Jason tried to use to figure out more information about the Mythic Garden. This plan was nothing special, but he could adjust it to everyone who looked like they might know something. However, what he didn't expect was that his plan directly worked, as the smaller youth with black hair exclaimed in astonishment. "You were invited to the Mythic Garden. Are you serious? So, you're not only from an influential family but also talented, how nice that must be." The black-haired youth thought that Jason was from an influential family because he had a concealment technique that could cover his mana fluctuations completely. Jason only smiled at his exclamation, while the other youth with brown hair seems to be much more serious. However, even the brown-haired youth couldn't help but show a proud facial expression at Jason's words as he said, "We can definitely help you, Jason. It's normal that your memories are a little bit blurry about the Mythic Garden, but you will have fewer problems as a citizen from Terebrine, which you don't seem to be. But that's fine and you won't have any long-term issues. If you were invited to the Mythic Garden, which is a permanent rift, governed by the Jewel clan as you might still remember, you can go to the government assessment hall which is situated in the center of the city to report your arrival. Maybe they'll ask you to be tested again, but that shouldn't be a problem as long as you tell them that you want the Hidden Prodigy assessment. After the assessment of your soul, mana aptitude, combat prowess, and so on, you will probably receive more information about the Mythic Garden. However, we don't know what they might be. Maybe you will also receive a date for the next expedition in the Mythic Garden. I hope that my explanation helped you in somehow." Once the youth finished his explanation, Jason nodded his head and thanked him before leaving the Golden Soul shop. Calling Emily, he said that he would leave for now before he hung up to call his masters to inform them about what he found out. Wasn't that too easy? Is the Mythic Garden really considered something special or is everything for show? However, Jason couldn't know that his first question about asking top students and teachers from A-grade schools or the government was precisely these people who know something about the Mythic Garden. It was not much, but more than enough for Jason to smile brightly. Chapter 332 What Now? By Hydesgrain. Jason was unaware of how fortunate he was with the question which he asked the two students from the Heir de Skull who were also blacksmith apprentices. The Mythic Garden was considered a national treasure from the Jewel clan that was only open for a few clans and families who have an alliance with the Jewel clan. Nevertheless, there were also other clans, companies and so on that were invited to enter the Mythic Garden upon being invited. This was the Jewel clan scheming to lure these clans and companies into the alliance after they understood how precious the Mythic Garden was, allowing the Jewel clan to demand valuable goods in return for the opportunity to enter the Mythic Garden. If Jason had asked something different or not concealed his mana core and fluctuations, he would probably be laughed at by the two students before they would have reported him. He was unsure why one was required to make the Hidden Prodigy assessment, but from the looks of it one required to have a monstrous talent. It was probably considered bad if normal citizens or too many people figured out too much about the Mythic Garden because of the astronomical value it had. After he got to know what he wanted to figure out, Jason pondered what he should do now. There was no need for him to think too long because it was definitely better to tell his masters every little detail he found out. Jason called them instead of going to their house due to a simple reason. If his masters were in the same opinion as him, Jason would immediately make the Hidden Prodigy assessment. Their knowledge about the Mythic Garden was still shallow, to put it simply. If he were to finish the Hidden Prodigy assessment, they might receive more information. This was definitely necessary, and the only downside was that he would have to reveal himself. However, this was not really something he and his masters were worried about because his new ID as Jason Lair made him 2 years older. As such, he was now 16 years and roughly 7 months old according to his new identity. With that, his combat prowess of a master rank at the 2nd level was at most above average. Accessing his quantum bracelet, a holographic screen manifested in front of him as he video called his masters. They answered the call without any expectations, but when they saw Jason grinning at them like he found a magical treasure at the monarch rank, both immediately knew that something good had happened. I found out a few things about the Mythic Garden, Jason said without adding any more than that as he waited for his masters to reply. His grin turned into a sly smile when his masters didn't respond to him because they waited for Jason to continue speaking. When they noticed that Jason didn't answer, Dahlia remained silent while Shane became annoyed. "Hurry up, tell us, or do you want to talk to us by staying silent?" Jason chuckled for a few seconds because he found himself extremely funny before he turned serious. "I didn't find out much, but it seems like the Mythic Garden is known by youths with great potential, influential families, and clans. However, their information is probably only shallow and not much, at least if I understood everything correctly. The Mythic Garden is a permanent, hidden, rift, governed by the Jewel clan, which we already figured out, but they also let other youths and families inside the rift as long as they have a great talent. I'm not sure why that is the case, but the person whom I got the information from also told me about a Hidden Prodigy assessment that is required to enter the Mythic Garden. One has to have a great result in this assessment to receive more information about everything which only someone who enters the Hidden Rift get to know. Furthermore, I'll receive a date when the expedition into the Mythic Garden would start the next time, even if I don't really know what that means. If possible, I would request to be tested by the government to receive more information, but I'm not really sure how smart it would be to expose my soul in that assessment." When Jason finished his explanation, he looked at his masters, carefully inspecting their reaction, only to see that they didn't react in any particular way. They just looked at him with a faint smile on their lips before Dahlia said, "How did you even figure that out in such a short amount of time? It hasn't even been a whole day since you went to the Golden Soul shop." Dahlia was curious about how exactly Jason managed something Shane was unable to do, which forced her to suppress laughing out when she saw a vein protruding on Shane's temples. Meanwhile, Shane tried to stay calm, not show any signs of being frustrated that Jason was much more efficient than him. In the end, he sighed deeply after his disciple answered Dahlia's question. "I asked 2 third-year students from the Erda School, which is a school in the A-grade city next to ours, about it. To put it simply, I concealed my mana core and all fluctuations, tried to put on a confident look, and asked a question while revealing a few information about the Mythic Garden that only a few people should know. I also said that I was invited and that my guide told me to ask top students from A-grade schools or the government about the Mythic Garden if my memories turn blurry. After scanning the youth's mana core that were already at the master rank while being in the 3rd year, I figured out that they must be top students or at least close to that level, which led me to ask them about more. Fortunately, they didn't seem suspicious about my question and they explained everything I just said without any doubts." Showing his masters a peace sign, both Shane and Dahlia couldn't suppress a sigh because their student's approach to figure out more information could have also gone the wrong way. Fortunately, everything went well and they found out more information about the Mythic Garden. However, Jason's worry about exposing his soul was definitely justified. He once manifested his whole soul world outside and it was gigantic. Maybe even this was an underestimation, but there was not really something they could compare it with. Nevertheless, more problematic than his soul world's size was the golden color and hundreds of colors floating through his soul world, indicating that his soul world was not something ordinary, even for youths that had a 4-star soul awakening. If he were to reveal his soul world's size, color, and the affinities he could contract, nobody would care about his soul energy replenishing speed or the amplification he received because he could contract hundreds of soul beasts. In the end, Jason could build his own small army, which was a scary thought. That was not possible through the high soul world amplification he received. Fortunately, Shane was still enthusiastic as he said, "You might not know this, but you can also regulate how much of your soul world you want to manifest as long as you practice the concealment technique a little bit. This is a trick people with a 4-star soul awakening like to use, if necessary. Just come back first and test manifesting a small part of your soul world. It's not even difficult and you can probably learn how to do this in a few hours or at most 2 days." Chapter 333 Hidden Prodigy Assessment by Hydesgrain. Less than a day passed since he found out more about the Mythic Garden and Shane explained everything necessary to know about how he can conceal his soul world. In the beginning, Jason imagined it to be extremely difficult, but it was not different from concealing his mana core. The only difference was that he leaked a little bit of his soul world instead of concealing it completely. He was even able to conceal the affinities that floated within his soul world from being manifested, which was definitely an advantage. As such, after he got the hang of concealing his soul world partially, Jason couldn't help but become impatient as he rushed towards the government assessment hall that was situated in the center of the city. Upon entering the large building whose walls radiated thick mana currents, he approached the reception without any hesitation. The receptionist, who saw a youth with black hair and golden eyes that were full of confidence walking toward him, couldn't help but think frustratingly, "Another one." He sighed deeply and Jason wasn't even required to say anything as the receptionist asked with a faint, fake smile, "Hello sir, I assume you're here for the Hidden Prodigy assessment, or am I wrong?" Hearing this, Jason couldn't help but lift his brow. It seemed like the receptionist asked this question several thousand times. His gaze showed how bored and annoyed he was, which was a big difference from his faint, faked smile. However, that was not something Jason cared about as he said, "Yes, that's true. I want to make an appointment for the Hidden Prodigy assessment." Looking into Jason's eyes that radiated pure kindness at the moment, the receptionist shook his head before he said, "There is no need for an appointment. It won't take long either way. Please verify your identity first, if sir wants to do the assessment immediately." "Won't take long?" Jason asked inwardly, but this was good because he wouldn't want to be observed and tested for several hours either. As such, he nodded his head and showed him the new identity he received, before he simply said, "Great, where should I go?" The receptionist who was talking to him before informed his colleague that he was testing Jason now before he stood up. "Just follow me." Following the receptionist, as he said, they entered an elevator that brought them to a lower floor, underground, that was humongous in size and completely white. In the center of the room were 2 orbs, which Jason was already familiar with. One of them was the Soul Awakening Orb that could also be used as a tool to assess someone's soul world later, and the other orb's name was unknown to Jason. However, it was the same orb used by Till to determine one's control over mana and the accuracy. The height of the floor they entered was more than 20 meters, and Jason asked himself if he should just fill the whole room with his soul world to get a good grade, when the receptionist said, "Let's not waste too much time, all right. We will start with the martial art proficiency assessment. Please demonstrate 2 of your martial art techniques." The AI will determine your proficiency and grade you according to your age. Hearing this, Jason could tell that he had to give his best because he was 16 years old according to his new identity instead of 14. Smiling lightly, he began to wonder if his proficiency with the martial art technique he learned was good for a 16-year-old youth. He was sure that he would be considered a comprehension prodigy with his real age, but 2 more years of training could make a great difference. As such, Jason pondered for a moment which martial art technique he should demonstrate. In the end, the answer was easy and not something he would normally ponder about. He just had to show the 2 techniques he was the most proficient in. Why am I suddenly so nervous? Jason asked himself, knowing that there was not really a need to be nervous. He was confident that even if his martial art proficiency was not considered prodigious as a 16-year-old youth, he would be able to get bonus points for the other exams. With that in mind, Jason started to run circles through the room before he started to exert the weightless steps technique, which increased his speed by roughly 60%. From one corner to another he barely needed a second, and pushing using the walls to push himself away as a means to not crash into the wall, Jason ran a whole circle. Without waiting for the AI or the receptionist to say anything, Jason decided that it would be better for him to demonstrate another Tier 1 he had a perfect mastery instead of one of the Tier 2 techniques he began to learn some time ago. Taking out the Viridi Starstream dagger from his spatial ring, he switched into the basic combat stance of the Transient Strike martial art technique he learned a long time before he exerted it. Circulating a large amount of mana through his body while showing sequence after sequence, his short show only took 1 minute before he halted in his tracks. One sweat pearl poured down his temples as he heard the AI's announcement. Peak Tier 1 movement technique detected, perfect mastery, grade above average. High Tier 1 close combat technique, perfect mastery, grade average, plus. Hearing this, Jason could only nod his head, thinking that the assessment might be more difficult than he expected. Only real prodigies will probably be able to enter the Mythic Garden, right? At least it looks like that to me, he thought before he turned towards the receptionist, who looked like he wanted to abandon Jason right off the bat. Should we continue with the next tests, or does Sir wants to know how exactly the AI made the assessment? It was as if the receptionist was already accustomed to youths complaining about their martial art proficiency result, which caused Jason to smile lightly as he confidently said, "Not really, I'm good to go with that result. We should continue, I want to read the information about the Mythic Garden as soon as possible." Lifting an eyebrow, the receptionist began to wonder how the youth in front of him was so confident after his martial art proficiency test result was between average and above average. However, he couldn't be bothered about that and just nodded his head before saying, "Next, we will test Sir's mana accuracy, sensitivity, and control. Please take the left orb right in front of you into 1 or 2 hands, and untie as many mana threads inside it within 1 minute. This test will start immediately after Sir touches the orb." Nodding, Jason approached the left orb without hesitation because his mana eyes already detected the main issue with the mana threads within the orb as he touched it with 1 hand. Inserting his mana to move the mana threads and untie them, 50 seconds passed before Jason stepped back. "Sir, you have 10 seconds left," the receptionist said without sounding too hurried about it, because he thought that Jason encountered the main issue of this test when the AI announced. Mana mastery test was successfully solved in 51 seconds. Grade superior. Jason smiled seeing the receptionist's reaction, who showed a proper reaction for the first time as he looked at him in astonishment. Even if he wanted to, Jason couldn't suppress himself as he said with a faint grin on his face, "Should we move to the soul assessment?" Chapter 334 Not Enough. By Hydesgrain. After the receptionist shook his head to regain his senses, he nodded before saying, "Yes, let's move to the soul assessment. Touch the soul awakening orb right next to the mana mastery orb and try to manifest your soul world. It's not difficult and shouldn't take long." When the receptionist finished speaking, Jason walked towards the soul awakening orb before he focused on exerting the concealment technique on his soul world, which revealed his mana fluctuations at the second master rank, while his mana core rank of a third expert was still hidden. Taking a deep breath, he laid his on the orb right in front of him, before manifesting his soul world at the same time. The soul awakening orb started to glow in a black-reddish color which began to change slowly to a dark red, lighted, orange, yellow, green until it finally stopped when it glowed in a sky blue color. Meanwhile, his soul world filled the whole room that was more than 20 meters in width, length, and height. A faint golden color permeated the whole room, in which he manifested his soul world. 3 different colored, complex masses floated through the room. These 3 colored masses were a black flame, a sky blue ice shard, and liquefied poison, exactly these affinities Jason already contracted. Jason not only concealed his soul world's size and affinities but also the dense gold color that could be seen within his whole soul world. Right now, it was only a faint golden color, but this was still enough to shock the receptionist greatly. It has been a long time since he saw that a real prodigy did the assessment in their small city. Normally prodigies were either in the greater schools inside A-grade cities or from influential families and clans who could order to receive a personal assessment at their home. However, Jason was one of the few prodigies he assessed in his whole life, and the receptionist couldn't help but feel jealous when the AI announced. Soul world detected. Scan completed. 4-star soul awakening, Heavens Will, grade superior. Jason was satisfied with this result and retracted his soul world again. He was sure that he was considered a prodigy with 2 superior grades, even if his martial art proficiency was average to above average according to his fake age on his new identity. As such, he looked at the receptionist with a faint smile, asking if he did well enough. While the receptionist tried to gather his senses, he manifested the holographic screen of the room they were currently inside, when the AI suddenly announced. Hidden Prodigy assessment concluded. Does the examinee want to add something unique about him? If not, the rating will hereby be not enough to pass the assessment. Both Jason and even the receptionist listened to the AI's voice confused as they mumbled. Not enough. Looking at Jason, the receptionist said, I'm sorry sir, but under normal circumstances, the given grades should be enough to pass the assessment. Please let me take a look at it for a moment to find the issue. Other than that, I can't do any more because the Jewel family sees it as mandatory for every prodigy to pass the Hidden Prodigy assessment before they're allowed to receive more information about the Mythic Garden. Nodding his head faintly, Jason began to wonder what was going on because he was confident in being considered a prodigy with his soul world and mana mastery that were both superior. Having a soul awakening at the Heavens Will should already be enough to be considered a prodigy, but his mana mastery was also extremely high. What do I have to do to pass this test? How many will even be able to pass this test, if I'm already failing with a 4-star soul awakening? It was only obvious for him to be confused when the receptionist suddenly asked. I'm sorry to ask this, but is Sir's mana core rank below the master rank? The AI says something like this, but I can only sense Sir's mana fluctuation at the second master rank right now. Considering that Sir has a superior mana mastery, the system deducted lots of points because of the examinee's faint determination and ambition to reach a higher rank. Sir is already 16 years and almost 7 months old, which means that mana fluctuations at the second master rank with a superior mana mastery are nothing special. Deducting the amplification of the body and mana core through possible soul bonds, the AI determines that Sir's mana core rank is below the master rank. If that is correct, Sir has to either reveal something else that is considered special by the AI. Otherwise, Sir would have to accept the AI's decision, which would mean that the Hidden Prodigy assessment was a failure. Trying to understand what happened, Jason could only sigh when he remembered that his mana core's concealment had been partially released during the short period which he required to conceal his soul world. In that short interval, the AI should have detected his mana fluctuations and started to make calculations, which led it to conclude that his mana core rank was not as high as it seemed to be. However, it was still astonishing for Jason to hear that the system deducted points for his laziness, and him not being determined or ambitious to reach a higher mana core rank. This was ridiculous, but he had to acknowledge that his fake age of 16 years and 7 months would probably indicate that he was rather lazy, considering that he had a superior mana mastery. Nevertheless, it was clear to Jason that he wouldn't receive more information about the Mythic Garden if he were to fail the Hidden Prodigy assessment just like that. As such, he had to think of certain things he could show the AI to give him some more extra points. With that in mind, Jason thought that showing that he had 3 affinities might be worse because he would indirectly show that the system's calculated mana core rank was even lower than it expected. System, I would like to add something to my assessment's final rating, he said, waiting for the system to say something, which it did after a few moments. Please proceed, examinee. Initially, he didn't want to reveal his strength to such an extent. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do about it. The Hidden Prodigy assessment was the best way for him to receive more information about the Mythic Garden. Allowing Scorpio to enter his mana core, he manifested his carapace on one of his arms before he told the system, I'm about to consolidate a fortified soul conjunction with my soul bond. Is that enough to cross the threshold for the assessment, or do I have to hurt me and my soul bond to manifest more of my soul bond's body? Jason was reluctant to show both the AI and receptionist that he established a complete fortified soul conjunction with Scorpio, which was the reason for him to make it look like he was just about to establish one. This would give him less bonus points, but establishing a fortified soul conjunction at the age of 16 to 17 years was still nothing to scoff at. Chapter 335, Land of the Blessed and Cursed, by Hydesgrain. When Jason revealed his almost established fortified soul conjunction with his soul bond, the receptionist couldn't remain professional anymore as he exclaimed, Whoa! How? Normally he would ignore this question and shrug his shoulders, but Jason died against it when he said, with a small lie mixed within, It's my first soul bond and I contracted it almost directly after it was born. After experiencing many life-threatening situations for more than 3 years, we just naturally formed a fortified soul conjunction. To be honest, I was also astonished about it. The receptionist nodded his head and was about to ask another question when the AI announced, Fortified soul conjunction has been detected. Extra points will be added. Threshold reached to pass the Hidden Prodigy assessment. Hereby the examinee will be allowed to enter the Mythic Garden during the next 12 days before she has to undergo the assessment once again. The necessary information about the Mythic Garden will be sent to examinee Jason Lara, S. Quantum Bracelet. Date to enter the Mythic Garden can be found from every government hall in Terebrine and the Jewel Country. Yes! Jason shouted inwardly, trying to suppress the sour feeling within him because he had to reveal his fortified soul conjunction with one of his soul bonds. The AI would probably record the whole assessment and send the result to higher authorities that had something to do with the Mythic Garden rift. He didn't receive the perfect outcome, but it was definitely better than nothing. Furthermore, revealing that he almost established a fortified soul conjunction was not really that much of an issue as long as he didn't encounter families and clans like the Drakes. The Jewel family seemed to enslave people, but only those without power, backing, or terrifying talents, which was good for Jason. It's done now either way. I shouldn't just accept what I did and continue to strive forward, he told himself with determination flickering in his eyes when he asked the receptionist, Do I have to read through everything I will be sent, or is there a way to get a short summary about all information? Smiling lightly, Jason wanted to figure out more about the date the AI was talking about before, when the receptionist said, I'm sorry to say this, but we examiners don't receive any information about the Mythic Garden. However, I can figure out when the next expedition will start. The position of the hidden rift will be revealed a week earlier and sent to Sir's quantum bracelet too. Jason could only nod his head, thinking that it was better than nothing if he received the date for the next expedition. If it's an expedition, does that mean there is a certain period to enter the Mythic Garden Rift? Otherwise, one could enter and leave it whenever one wants to. He had often heard from permanent rifts that were only opened for a few months every year, and the Mythic Garden might be similar in that case. However, there was no need to think about it anymore because he received a notification on his quantum bracelet with a file that had several large documents inside it. Nevertheless, Jason wanted to find out the date for the next expedition first, before anything else. They left the large white room used for the hidden prodigy assessment and entered the elevator that brought them back to the surface level. The receptionist returned back to his seat behind the reception where his colleague was still seated. It looked like he didn't move a single inch during the last few minutes, which Jason noticed with a faint smile. He walked towards the reception where the receptionist was already searching for the date on which the Mythic Garden would open for everyone who passed the assessment. There is no exact date yet, but according to the provided information, the Mythic Garden Rift should open early June. As such, Sir should receive a notification about the exact date and position at the end of May. I hope my service was good enough and that there was nothing making Sir feel uncomfortable. Early June. That means I have more than 2 months to become stronger. Jason thought before he began to wonder what kind of rift the Mythic Garden was. Just don't let it be above a 4-star rift. He pleaded before he told the receptionist that everything was good before turning around to walk out of the government assessment hall. Before doing anything else, he called his masters to tell them that he would come home to share what happened. After that, they could read through the Mythic Garden file to find out more about the rift, its strength, and what they should be aware of. As such, Jason departed quickly before he called a shuttle to leave the city's center quietly. Less than half an hour later, he arrived in front of their small house where Jason got out of the shuttle. Shane and Dahlia perceived his arrival almost immediately, as if they were waiting for him when they opened the door at the entrance at the exact moment Jason stood in front of it. Come in and summarize everything before we take a look at the Mythic Garden file, Shane said hurriedly, without being able to stay patient. Dahlia was able to refrain herself more than Shane and sighed when she saw how he acted. Meanwhile, Emily was either working or absorbing mana inside the Golden Soul shop if the number of customers was not too much for Silas to take care of alone. Meanwhile, Jason could understand his master's impatience because he felt exactly the same. As such, they sat down on the couch before Jason summarized everything that happened in a few sentences. He also told his masters that he revealed his fortified soul conjunction to a certain extent, but they weren't really worried about that. In the end, they could still protect Jason as long as he didn't enter a restricted rift, which was what both Shane and Dahlia imagined the Mythic Garden Rift to be. However, considering that the disciple became much stronger since he came out of the 4-star rift, they remained calm and unbothered. After Jason finished his summary, Shane told him to open the Mythic Garden files, not even giving Jason enough time to breathe freely. Revealing the content of the first file, the words that jumped into their view were Land of the Blessed and Cursed, with which Shane and Dahlia were already familiar. The next information were things they already knew about, only that the blurry memories prevented them from clearly seeing and remembering everything. Jason and his masters were already aware that the Mythic Garden was a permanent rift, but new to them was that it was not only a 4-star rift but also with several restrictions on it. Not only was there a curse preventing memories from within the rift to stay intact, which caused the blurry sensation, but there was a restriction according to one's age that was 20 years. Everyone at and below the age of 20 could enter the Mythic Garden. It doesn't matter which mana core rank they have, and only their age is important for the rift. Other than that, one was able to enter and leave the rift for 6 months in the whole year. It looked like early June was when the Mythic Garden Rift would open again, for a period of 6 months. According to the restrictions they could see in the first file, the Jewel family made a good decision with the hidden prodigy assessment. There would only be young and powerful prodigies able to enter the Mythic Garden Rift due to the age restriction. However, what shocked all of them was the death rate, which was also written inside the first file, underlined and thickly written in red color. Death rate, 80%. Chapter 336 Drop in the Ocean by Hydesgrain. Death rate, 80%. Huh. Jason exclaimed, perplexed, not knowing whether his eyes were working properly or not. A death rate of 80%. Is that a mistake, or why else would young men and women at and below the age of 20 enter the Mythic Garden with such a high death rate? However, after averting his gaze to his masters, Jason figured out that they were more composed than him hearing this information. Seeing this, he adjusted his train of thoughts and thought about it in a more detailed manner. If the Mythic Garden restricts everyone above the age of 20 from entering it, the highest Mana Core rank to enter should be at the lower Magus rank, or rather lowest Lich stage. To achieve this, one needs to have a great mana aptitude. In comparison, the beasts inside a 4-star rift can be at the peak magical rank, which is much stronger. The average strength of a 4-star rift is at the unblemished rank, which is something I can already defeat alone. At least the weaker unblemished beasts. With Artemis and Scorpio, even peak unblemished beasts shouldn't be an issue. Others should have peak unblemished soul bonds too. So why exactly is the death rate so high? Are the beasts at the Magus rank the biggest issue, or is there something else? Dahlia noticed that Jason was deep in thoughts, probably thinking about the reason for the high death rate. When she saw him frowning deeply, Dahlia decided to intervene. Jason might be able to come to his own conclusion in a while, but Dahlia thought that it was more important to figure out what her disciple wanted to do. The death rate inside the 4-star rift shouldn't be so high, and it's just to intimidate weak-willed prodigies. However, that doesn't mean that you can ignore the death rate, because it's also a warning. There is an age restriction that doesn't concern you, but you should consider that the Mythic Garden is known as the Land of the Blessed and Cursed. If you were to encounter an unblemished beast with a strong curse, it might even be able to defeat you, even after you attained a combat prowess of a Magus rank. Cursed beings should be the reason for such a high death rate, and if I were, to be honest, even humans themselves might be the reason for such a shocking death rate. Imagine you find a beast with an extremely strong blessing, everyone sought out. What do you think would happen if someone else were to see you catching this beast? I doubt that others would say, "Congratulations. You are really lucky. Have fun with your blessed beast. I'm so jealous of you." Rather, they would try to hinder you in binding the blessed beast, or even kill you mercilessly. I'm not sure if you already knew it, but you should know that beasts that have been contracted for less than 2 weeks will be expelled from the soul world if the master dies. This is not a certain event, but it happened often enough. There were many times that humans acted worse than wild beasts when they saw a suitable blessed beast for themselves. They would even rip apart their own family and friends for a beast with a strong blessing. Nodding his head, Jason found everything his master said plausible. He would probably come to the same conclusion after he thought longer about it, but Dahlia looked at him impatiently, which made him feel uncomfortable. Is there something wrong? He only asked before Jason suddenly got an idea. Do you look at me like that because you don't want me to enter the Mythic Garden? He could already imagine that Dahlia didn't want him to enter the Mythic Garden Rift because it was a 4-star rift similar to the rift inside Syro City which he entered before. Several months passed since then, and Jason's strength increased by a large margin so that he and his soul bonds were able to fight against a large group of unblemished ranked beasts. As such, entering Syro City's 4-star rift wouldn't be an issue anymore, which was however something completely different to the Mythic Garden. Do I have to enter another rift so soon? He asked himself with a frustrated expression before he looked at Shane, who was also deep in thoughts. However, Jason was not even able to ask Shane something when Dahlia said, "To be honest, I don't want you to enter the Mythic Garden because it is way too dangerous. Even more than a normal 4-star rift. Comparing your current situation with that of several months ago, I would rather let you enter a 4-star rift at the Adept rank than to allow you to enter the Mythic Garden. He could understand Dahlia completely because he himself didn't want to enter the Mythic Garden either, considering that there were not only strong beasts but also humans from all kinds of influential backgrounds that would do everything in order to procure what they desired. Scratching the back of his head, he could finally ask Shane what he wanted to know. Master, how high are the chances that we will be able to find a suitable cursed beast for me if I don't enter the Mythic Garden? In comparison, how much higher might be the chances if I were to enter the Mythic Garden? Shane, thrown out of his thoughts, looked at Jason as he asked. I think it's okay for me to be blunt, right? Hearing this, Jason could only frown lightly as he nodded faintly. If you don't enter the Mythic Garden, your chances to find a perfectly suitable beast that doesn't curse anything else but your soul world amplification are infinitely close to zero. There are not many cursed beasts on Argos, to begin with, and to find a perfectly suitable is more difficult than searching for a needle in a haystack. It might be comparable to searching for a certain drop of water in the ocean. On the other hand, if you don't care about other traits being weakened, the chances are slightly higher but still close to zero. You'll have to search for several years if not decades to find a suitable beast. That is if you are lucky. During this time, your soul bonds would have to restrict the growth almost all the time and you wouldn't be able to contract a new soul bond for a long time because your vessel is already too feeble to accommodate 2 beasts. Your soul world's amplification is just too strong. Your chances will increase by at least 10 times if not 100 times if you were to enter the Mythic Garden. I can't tell you why because my memories are blurred, but I feel like the Mythic Garden contains various types of blessed and cursed beings. One of them should definitely suit you to a certain degree, even if it is not perfect. In my opinion, finding a perfect suitable cursed beast is not feasible, and if you were to find one, it can only be inside the Mythic Garden. It might be dangerous, but you don't really have many options. You could also slow down your soul bond's growth and never allow them to become stronger so that your mana core rank can slowly catch up. However, I doubt that you want to slow down your soul bond's growth or change something else. In the end, it wouldn't be helpful either because binding another soul bond would worsen your situation once again. This would be an endless, vicious cycle. If I'm not wrong, your highest priority is to become much stronger and find your mother's murderer. The blood sect is not something you should take lightly. Nevertheless, it is still your choice and we won't intervene in your choice. Chapter 337 Plot by Hydesgrain. The Mythic Garden would be dangerous for Jason to enter, that was evident. However, he was in a dire need to curse his soul world core's high amplification in order to weaken his soul bond's share of strength which he received. While his soul world was colossal in size with all kinds of possible affinities which was extremely good, Jason's soul world's high soul amplification was the only advantage that began to turn into a disadvantage. If he wanted to contract more beasts in the future, he would have to enlarge and strengthen his vessel, which was not easy because his soul bonds were currently growing much faster than his vessel was. It hasn't been long since the pain caused by his soul bond's transferred strength lessened before it finally diminished completely. As such, he didn't feel any pain from his vessel, which could however change at any moment, if he were to allow Artemis or Scorpio to break into the magical beast rank. They were currently gathering mana, but Jason was sure that they would liquefy their mana and enter the magical rank before he would be able to reinforce his vessel enough to cope with the large share of strength he would receive from a magical ranked beast. With his current soul amplification, he received 33% of his soul bond's strength unconditionally. A magical ranked beast's strength is a few times higher than that of a peak unblemished beast under normal circumstances, which would cause Jason's mana core size and physique to increase by a few levels if Artemis or Scorpio were to compress their mana in mana drops right now. Jason couldn't cope with that, and neither did he want to restrict his soul bonds. Furthermore, he wanted to obtain more soul bonds in the future in order to claim more affinities. At the same time, he could build a small, loyal army of soul bonds, which was also great. As such, Jason thought that it would be the right decision for him to enter the Mythic Garden. He was still reluctant, but it seemed to be the path he had to take to not break apart or slow down his desire to become stronger. Sighing deeply, Jason subconsciously mumbled, "How much stronger can I become in 2 months?" Right now his strength was almost at the 3rd master rank, which was definitely not enough to survive inside the Mythic Garden for 6 months. If he were to remain inside the rift for the whole interval it was open in order to find a suitable cursed soul bond. If my Black Origin flame evolves before the 2 months end, the second baptism would solve many problems, Jason thought out loud before looking at his masters who waited for his answer. It might be dangerous, but I don't think I can wait longer, if I don't want to restrict my soul bonds from breaking into the magical rank, to prevent me from ripping me apart, for too long. Furthermore, if I don't enter the Mythic Garden this year, I would have to do it next year, at last, to find a suitable soul bond because Artemis and Scorpio's strength has to increase again. I don't want to live with the constant threat of being ripped apart by my own soul bonds because of my soul world cause high amplification. To prevent dying I'll have to increase my strength and both Artemis and Scorpio's combat prowess as much as possible in the next months. If the Black Origin flame doesn't evolve during these 2 months, it will most likely evolve when I'm inside the Mythic Garden. That is, if there is no further requirement the Black Origin flame might need to fulfill to evolve. The baptism I'll receive at that time will make me stronger once again, increasing my chances to survive by a large margin. I know it might be dangerous to receive the baptism in an open, unknown rift, but I can't really force the Black Origin flame to evolve when I want it to. When Shane and Dahlia heard his answer, Dahlia could only sigh deeply while Shane nodded his head in approval before he asked, "In that case, what exactly are your goals for the next 2 months? Do you want to refine your physique and absorb mana for 2 months straight, or do you want to focus on increasing your soul bond's combat prowess?" His reason to ask this question was simple, yet important. Shane wanted to figure out what exactly Jason wanted to focus on for the next 2 months to see how efficient his plan was and what he might miss out on. Jason didn't expect Shane to ask him that question immediately after he chose to enter the Mythic Garden. This caused him to stand in front of his masters without any plan. He thought about it for a moment before saying, "I'll have to provide the Black Origin flame with mana and soul energy during the next 2 months so that it can create the mana core which will probably enable it to evolve. Meanwhile, my shop is still open, but I don't know if I can supply enough goods during the next 2 months, so it might be better to change something there. Maybe it would be better to limit the supply to a certain amount of perfectly purified bars and potions for each day. I obviously need to refine my body and absorb mana in the next 2 months. Furthermore, I need to exert the Heaven's Hell technique at least once a day to make up for the soul energy the black energy used up. I also don't know how many soul energy units the cursed beast I want to form a contract with might require, which is another reason for me to increase my soul energy beforehand. Other than that, I want to continue forging and concocting because it does not only allow me to earn lots of credits, but I can also create my own stockpile of potions and weapons for the Mythic Garden. Forging and concocting is also a good exercise to calm my mind and increase my proficiency with the Black Origin flame affinity. Come to think of it, I also need to increase my proficiency with the ice and poison affinity. The most time-consuming is practicing the Heaven's Hell technique. As such, I probably won't be able to do that inside the Mythic Garden. At least if I'm not in a completely safe area, which I will probably not find quickly. As such, it would be best if I were to use the splitting mind technique in order to create my second sub-area. I would like to establish a passive soul energy refining cycle to increase my soul energy without the need to actively practice it. Meanwhile, I need Artemis and Scorpio to increase their combat prowess because they are still lacking. While Dahlia fell into a deep silence, Shane mumbled, "I forgot that you already have a sub-area, right? It would be your second one. This would be extremely expensive, and the dangers you have to face without a fruit similar to the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit you used the first time would be much higher." Jason nodded his head too as he said, "If I can't refine my mind and create my second sub-area now, I'll just do it later. I think it would be best if I were to do it as early as possible, but it's not like I can't wait. I don't have enough funds either way." Dahlia looked at Jason for a moment before she averted her attention to Shane when she got an idea, who also looked at her as if he wanted to prevent her from saying anything. "Don't you still have the 3 storage rings and storage devices from the 2 fake sovereigns, Ranks and Old Drake?" Sweat pearls to run down Shane's back, and he tried to ignore Dahlia's gaze when he faintly said, "No. I don't have them anymore. I probably threw them away." Chapter 338 Promise by Hydesgrain. Shane tried his best to not look towards Dahlia, who was staring at him intently. "Are you sure that you don't have them anymore? If I search and find them, they're mine." "Don't dare to lie to me." Not only Shane flinched when he heard this, but Jason, who had nothing to do with this mess, suddenly stiffened as goosebumps covered his body. "Don't search. I know where they are. What do you want to do with them?" Shane hurriedly asked, furrowing his brows. Jason had already a rough understanding of Dahlia's behavior and assumed that she wanted to help him with establishing his second sub-area. He also knew that his masters had more than enough star notes, mana stones, and so on to acquire everything necessary, but that didn't mean he would ask them to get everything without giving them anything in return. Unfortunately, he had nothing to return, and thus, Jason didn't want to bother to ask his masters to receive even more resources. Right now, his Golden Soul shop was doing excellent and earning more than 1 star note per day. Once he was able to upgrade his goods to grade 2 potions and perfectly purified bars, his gains would increase manifolds. Thanks to that, he was confident in acquiring enough resources to build his second sub-area in no time. There was only one slightly larger problem: where to acquire an object similar to the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit. However, even if Jason was aware of where he could obtain such a brain-protecting object, he also knew that he wouldn't have enough star notes to purchase something like that. Mana stones were already expensive, however, they were still much cheaper compared to magical treasures. This was a fact everyone knew, and Jason could only sigh at this thought. Dahlia was aware that Jason didn't want to receive their help all the time without giving them anything in return, which forced her to think of a solution to satisfy everyone equally. This also included Shane, whose stingy personality was slowly re-emerging. "Let's just take a look if we can find a magical treasure that protects one's brain." "Why are you so nervous, Shane? It's not like I will take everything from you as long as you don't lie to me." Shane sighed in relief and nodded his head before he released his mana to envelop the whole house. Only a moment later, 3 spatial rings and storage devices floated towards the group of 3. He retracted the mana fluctuations after the spatial ring and storage devices landed on the small table that stood in front of them as he said, "I destroyed the mana fluctuation imprints a while ago but couldn't take a look inside yet." Fortunately, Shane calmed down again fast, and he turned serious after thinking that Jason would definitely need something to protect his brain to establish a second sub-area with the mind-splitting technique. It was not mandatory, but at the same time, it was much better to protect one's brain while doing such a difficult task like splitting one's mind. Is it normal for a disciple to be so expensive? He began to ask himself, sulking inwardly before he looked at Jason and Dahlia. "Let's take a look inside the spatial rings first and check out if there is something Jason could use to protect his brain." Jason just nodded his head, thinking that he would pay his masters everything back once he was able to when he took one spatial ring and storage device into his hand. Inserting mana into the spatial ring first, Jason's mind entered its small dimension where he saw a mana grade 3 longsword, a small mountain of high-grade mana stones, many sets of clothes, a few miscellaneous items, partially purified grade 3 potions, and a few sealed herbs. Everything was worth a little fortune, but there was nothing inside the spatial ring Jason needed to establish his second sub-area, except the mana stones. As such, He laid the spatial ring back before he took one of the storage devices that laid in front of him. Inserting his mana into it, Jason entered a small dimension with a slightly longer delay. Unfortunately, he couldn't find what he searched for and exited the small dimension once again. Laying down the storage device, he sighed as he said, "I would be a lie if I were to say that they're poor and the content inside the spatial ring and storage device is worth more than 10,000 star notes, but I didn't even see one expensive high-grade herb." This was Jason's conclusion, and from the looks of it, Shane and Dahlia couldn't find anything either. As such, Dahlia turned to Jason with a firm expression as she said, "We know that you won't be able to acquire a brain-protecting treasure, and we know each other long enough that you don't like things without giving anything in return, which already happened before. However, we have other things to take care of too, and you can't just forge or concoct all day long to acquire enough funds for everything during the next 2 months, right? How about we take care of the brain-protecting treasure and you try to get enough funds for mana stones? At the same time, you should focus on all other aspects you want to improve until you enter the Mythic Garden. If you don't like everything for granted, pay us back in the future. With that, I don't mean that you should give us star notes. Maybe you are bothered that you never did anything good for us, but we, or at least I don't mind that. Just think of it as if you owe us one or multiple favors if you want." Before Jason could say anything, Shane erupted as he said, "What do you mean? At least I don't mind that. Being careful with finances is also important, and knowing that Jason doesn't like to get everything gifted, I intentionally didn't offer him the same things you did." Jason smiled when he saw his masters quarreling with each other, and thinking about Dahlia's offer carefully, he thought that it was definitely beneficial to have such great masters. "I accept the offer and will pack everything back. Once I'm strong enough, I can protect both of you from the big clans and take care of everything." He gave his masters a promise to protect them and that he would pay them back everything, once he was able to. How should he have known that the future would be much more chaotic and difficult to deal with than he expected it to be? When Shane and Dahlia heard that Jason wants to protect them in the future, a faint smile emerged on their face, but deep within their eyes, one could also see sadness. It seemed as if his masters knew something Jason was unaware of. While he was trying to sound confident as he voiced out his promise, Shane and Dahlia looked into each other's eyes while thinking the same about the young disciple. He is still too young and naive. He has yet to see how treacherous mankind really is. After living for several centuries, Jason's masters knew that dangerous times approached them at a rapid pace, and that it was only a matter of time before mankind's true colors would be revealed. This premonition Shane and Dahlia had only worsened over the last few months with the appearance of a goblin king that was about to be nurtured by an extremely powerful origin flame, the emergence of a 4-star rift inside Syro City, the fight of 3 foreign races, and knowing that the Drake family was not only backed by a foreign race but also oppressing his territory since his clan's headquarters was destroyed. If that was everything, they would already be worried, but the Jewel family seemed to be as malicious as the Drake family. How long will it take for mankind's war, led by the foreign races in the shadows, to start? Chapter 339, Restless by Hydesgrain. Jason was completely oblivious to the dangers that were about to pass through Canir and the archipelago, but his masters weren't. If they wanted to make the best out of the current situation, they would either have to become stronger by themselves, which would take decades with the diminishing potential, or nurture someone who was able to change the tides. Their small disciple was the most talented youth they had ever seen in their whole life, and it would only be a matter of time until he would become stronger than anyone else. However, time was what they were lacking. As such, Shane and Dahlia tried many different tactics to give Jason more resources every now and then. After they figured out that Jason was about to establish his second sub-area, Dahlia wanted to give him more resources openly, without demanding anything in exchange. It might sound dumb to others, however, Jason accepted the resources only in exchange for handing out favors because he felt that it was necessary. He didn't know why exactly he felt like this and couldn't describe his feelings either. However, Jason knew deep down within him that every little help he receives was necessary. As such, he accepted their offer to acquire a brain protection treasure with which he could refine his brain before splitting it once again. Taking a deep breath, Jason pondered about the most efficient way he could take to improve his overall combat prowess in addition to his soul bonds, in merely 2 months at that. Should I stay inside the abandoned lands for 2 months? Jason mumbled to himself, which was heard by Shane, who said, "That's probably the best for your sublons in order to strengthen their perception and combat awareness. Your own progress shouldn't slow down there either. Maybe Dalir or I should protect you, or I can summon one of my soulbonds to act as your bodyguard. With that, you shouldn't have any problems in the abandoned lands. The only thing we would have to take care of might be that you would need to have enough cultivation resources and that we can transport the goods you forge and concoct from the abandoned lands to your little golden soul shop." Dalir also nodded her head and Jason smiled, thinking that everything was concluded as Shane suddenly asked, "Do you want to go immediately?" Hearing this, Jason couldn't even think of suppressing laughing out loud. It seemed as if he was not the only impatient person, and when Shane noticed Dalir glaring at him, he just said, "If he starts with everything right off the bat, he has a few hours longer to improve his strength." This sounded logical, but both Jason and Dalir knew that making preparations was also important to work efficiently. As such, Jason shook his head before he said, "I want to make some preparations first before going to the abandoned lands again. With enough preparations, I wouldn't need to stop cultivating at all, and everything will be much smoother that way." Shane nodded his head, smiling dryly. "Just take the content of one spatial ring and we'll purchase a few high-grade medical solutions. That way you shouldn't need to make any preparations, right? There is not much you need either way. Maybe a few miscellaneous items, food, and other necessities, but the cultivation resources should be the most important." Jason didn't really understand why Shane became so impatient. It was so sudden, but he also felt the urge to depart as soon as possible. Since they found out more about the Mythic Garden, and that the Jewel clan was behind the mysterious addictive cultivation drug, Jason and his masters felt restless. Thus, Jason nodded his head without saying anything else before he transferred a bunch of high-grade mana stones out of one of the 3 spatial rings into his own. Taking a look into his spatial ring to see if he had enough food for himself and specialized food for his soulbonds, Jason was ready to depart as he said, "I'm probably only lacking in more medical solutions. Other than that, I should have everything I need to depart directly." Dalir could only sigh at the 2 men's behavior when she said, "I'll stay here and take care of Emily. Her soulbond will also hatch soon and she will need every little help one can give her. I just hope that her soul amplification is not too high." Shane and Jason nodded their head before Shane manifested a spatial portal in front of him through which he jumped without wasting another second. Jason followed suit and they emerged above the abandoned lands only a few more jumps through spatial portals later. Enveloped by Shane's mana, Jason was able to levitate and he manifested Artemis wings to fly through the sky before descending to the ground. Searching for a good area to stay for the next 2 months didn't take that long because Shane simply terraformed a place to make it the most suitable and comfortable for him to stay. At the same time, it was a good place for Jason to absorb mana, refine his body inside a basin with the help of the Netherworld's Fort technique, increase his proficiency with his affinities. Maybe it was even suitable to learn a new martial art technique which might come in handy inside the Mythic Garden. Setting up everything necessary, Jason was glad that Shane followed him, who suddenly said with a sly smile, "Now that we have 2 months, I'll coordinate your training and show you how terrifying I can't be." He sounded happy and wicked at the same time, which caused Jason to furrow his brows as he thought, "His training won't kill me, right?" 2 months later. Jason was not sure what he expected from Shane's training, but that he was even too tired to sleep soundly was enough for him to understand that it was on a completely different league than the training he underwent before. Almost 2 months passed and Jason couldn't help but feel relieved that it was finally over. He was currently laying on the ground, giving his utmost efforts to breathe while Shane stood above him in sparing clothes as he said, Is that already everything you can do? We only spared a little bit, and you already look worse than an undead being. However, not only Jason was exhausted but also Artemis and Scorpio laid next to him on the ground, giving their best efforts to stay alive. Ugh! Why did I even follow Shane? Jason asked himself for a moment before disregarding this thought. Thanks to his master's efforts, he felt that his, Artemis and Scorpio's combat prowess and perception heightened by a large margin, which was the reason they even departed to the abandoned lands. During the last 2 months, he sparred with Shane almost every day while his soul bonds were out hunting unblemished beasts, trying to adjust themselves to their strength, which was easier said than done. Only in the last few days, Jason and his soul bonds began to fight against Shane together, only to be beaten into a pulp every single time. Shane only stopped the spar when he noticed that they could be seriously injured or after sensing that the recuperation process might take longer than a day. Other than that, Jason tried to improve his proficiency with the 3 affinities he possessed. He even learned a new martial art technique, called Devious Swordmaster. It was a Tier 2 technique that focused on swift attacks and the utilization of feints to distort the opponent's perception. The best weapon to use this technique with was a light longsword, which was also the weapon Jason was practicing with during the last 2 months. After he figured out that daggers had their limits, Jason tried to find other solutions to fight someone without having to lose out on speed. Searching for a few martial art techniques he was interested in, he also found the Devious Swordmaster technique, which recommended a light longsword. Thus Jason forged himself a pseudo grade 2 longsword after the 2 months passed, which was a feat he never imagined to achieve in such a short time. However, Shane's detailed explanations, his accurate control over mana, the help of his Black Origin Flame's innate traits, and the existence of his mana eyes allowed him to succeed. Jason didn't even know how many times he failed, but in the end, he forged a light pseudo grade 2 longsword which filled him with pride. Unfortunately, this pride was easily smashed after Shane demonstrated to him how weak he and his soul bonds were, as he used only one hand to defeat them without much effort. Furthermore, it looked like Shane was happy to see his pride being shattered, which was even worse for Jason to see. Chapter 340 Meeting Point by Hydesgrain. It was only obvious that Shane could defeat Jason and his soul bonds with his overwhelming strength. This felt even worse when he adjusted his strength to be on par with a peak master rank, because his combat awareness, experience, and also proficiency in martial art techniques were in a completely different league than Jason's. Nevertheless, Jason learned a lot thanks to Shane's sparring, and his Devious Swordmaster technique was already approaching the familiar mastery that came immediately after the basic mastery. Thanks to his mana eyes and Shane demonstrating the Tier 2 martial art technique in detail, Jason didn't have any problems while practicing it. He was also able to fix his flaws shortly after Shane pointed them out. Other than sparring with each other, Shane decided that it was time for him to teach Jason about blacksmithing more in depth. Not only was it important for him to learn more about blacksmithing and every little process of it, but Shane was also able to demonstrate everything. This helped Jason a lot to see the tiniest details he would have to pay attention to. Through this, Jason was able to forge a pseudo-mana grade 2 weapon after only 2 months, which was a shocking achievement. Jason knew that the pseudo-mana grade 2 light longsword was not even close to perfection, but it was already better than the Viridi Starstream dagger set he possessed. The light longsword in his possession was sharp enough to pierce through the hide of every magical ranked beast, as long as he was able to supply it with enough mana, which was probably the biggest downside of his current situation. 2 months passed and Jason absorbed mana for several hours daily, which included the liquefied mana from grade 3 mana stones, which he placed around him to accelerate his mana absorption. This should have accelerated his speed further, considering that his mana mastery was superior while the same applied for his aptitude. He should have been able to break through several levels. Unfortunately, this only included youths that were at the expert rank after receiving their soulbond's share of strength. Jason was on a whole different league, with his mana core size that reached the 3rd master rank, while his mana core rank increased by only 1 level in a duration of 2 months. Under normal circumstances, this was a very good achievement for most youths. However, Jason was not satisfied with it because he knew that he could do much better. His whole body was craving for mana, but something was holding him back. Whether it was the amount or pureness of mana around him, his current mana absorption speed which increased only slowly, or something else, Jason could only accept his situation as it currently was. Attaining a mana core of the 4th expert rank at the age of 14 years and almost 9 months was nothing special, but his soul world's amplifications not only slowed down his breakthrough speed, but on the other side, it allowed him to be much stronger than his mana core rank 2. As such, Jason told himself that he shouldn't be too disappointed with himself because it was unlikely that many youths at his age were able to have a mana core size comparable to that of an average 3rd master rank. While his mana core rank was still bothering him slightly, his body refining process accelerated and Jason noticed that the Netherworld's fort body refining technique was slowly reaching the first quarter of the initial phase. This might sound weak and like nothing special, but the initial phase of the Netherworld's fort technique could only be completed when he left the mortal stage by compressing his mana into the first liquefied drop of mana. As such, he had to reach the Magus rank, or also called Lick stage, which would take a while. That was if his soul amplification would stay so high without being cursed and weakened. During the last 2 months, Jason didn't neglect to practice the Heaven's Hell technique either. He was unable to practice very often because his time was tightly scheduled, but Shane told him that he should reach a certain amount of soul energy units before he could switch to doing other, more important things. In the end, Jason would need enough soul energy to bind a new soul bond. However, after figuring out that the Mythic Garden was only a 4-star rift, the possibility of finding a suitable cursed beast among Guardian ranked beasts that shouldn't exist in 4-star rifts in the first place, was almost zero. Thus, he required 10,000 vacant soul energy units if he were to find a suitable cursed being at the peak magical rank. That was, if he cursed beings were not similar to mythical beasts that required more soul energy units, which was something Jason was unaware of. Even Shane was unsure about this fact because his Bane of Thousand Eyes Wolf was just a pseudo-cursed beast. It didn't demand more soul energy units than a common Guardian ranked beast would. Unfortunately, he would have to defeat and catch such a suitable cursed beast first before binding it, and Jason was sure that he would be unable to defeat a peak magical ranked beast. Even low Magus ranked beasts with strong curses would be able to defeat him and his sublons without much difficulty, which was frustrating but the bitter truth. The Golden Soul Shop's profits increased manifold after Jason began to exhibit perfectly purified grade 2 bars, potions, and weapons. Thanks to that, his shop became much more popular, and only 2 months later Jason's wealth increased to 700 star notes, which would have been enough to purchase a lot of mana stones. Taking the mana stones he had still left into account, Jason was confident to refine his brain and create a second sub-area by splitting his mind as long as nothing went wrong. To his misfortune, neither Shane nor Dahlia were able to procure a brain protection treasure, which gave Jason 2 choices. The first one was that he would still refine his brain, which would cripple him permanently if he were to make a small mistake, while the second choice would be to postpone refining his brain until he was able to acquire a brain protection treasure. Taking the first choice would be extremely dangerous, which might cripple him or cause his death, while the second choice would evidently become a small thorn in his eyes because he wanted to establish his second sub-area. Jason wanted to create a continuous circle in his soul world core with which he could increase his soul energy without practicing the Heaven's Hell technique. This would save him a lot of time, which he could use more efficiently. However, after thinking about it, Jason found it unreasonable to take the first option because his current soul energy was already enough to take on a peak magical ranked beast. He had 22,000 soul energy units, while 16,000 of them were still vacant. After he decided to take the second option, Jason couldn't help but feel a little bit frustrated. However, he took only for a short time to notice that his Black Origin Flame already constructed 3/4 of its mana core. This caused his frustration to dissipate almost immediately. It would only take a few weeks until the Mana core was finally constructed, and when that happened, the Black Origin flame would hopefully evolve. This was good to hear because it was right before his final departure to the Mythic Garden, which would happen soon. Jason had already received a notification about their assigned meeting point, which was a C-grade city called Asgard. He was nervous and didn't know what would happen, but on the other side, Jason also knew that his life was on the line, which caused him to calm down extremely fast. On the 1st of June, Shane brought him to Asgard before he wished Jason good luck, threatening him that he would be hunted if he were to die inside the Mythic Garden. Even if it's very important for you to find a suitable cursed beast, don't act suicidal. You have only one life. Jason was aware of this fact, however, this was not really helpful. In the end, he would have to give his all in order to procure a suitable cursed beast in order to survive in the first place. His life was definitely the most important, but risking a little but might not be the wrong decision in some situations.